Here we have lesson 1-4 of Geometry Unit 1. And this is graphing linear equations. And again, I think we're going to find this to be familiar because we learned how to graph linear equations back in Algebra 1. But I want to make sure we know how to do that. So it's a little bit of a refresher, a little review. Okay, and it just says I can graph a line no matter the form of the equation. So we're going to really focus in on the fact that we can be given equations in three forms that are easy to graph. And we need to recognize which form it is and then how to use it to graph. That's the whole key here, just trying to make you versatile, all right? So the forms of a linear equation are the standard, the slope-intercept, and the point-slope. And so the standard form, it's easy for us to figure out the x and y intercepts if we're in standard form. So what we see for standard form is x and y are on the same side of the equal sign. The constant c is on the other side of the equal sign. And we can quickly find the x and y intercepts and plot those 2 points on the x and the y axis and graph our line. The second one is slope-intercept form. This one's probably most familiar to you. B is the y-intercept. And so we would start, or I say B means begin. So we would begin on the y-axis at that B value. And then M for me means to move. And that is the slope. So slope's going to be a fraction. If it's not a fraction already, you need to make it into a fraction by putting it over 1. And then the top number tells you to move up or down, and the bottom number is going to tell you to move to the right. And then the last one is point-slope form, and right here in x1 and a y1 actually tells us the point, x1, y1, that the graph goes through. And then we can use the slopes. We're going to plot this point. And then we're going to use M to move. That is our slope. So same thing. We're going to want to make that a fraction. Top number tells us up or down, depending whether it's positive or negative, and the bottom number tells us to move to the right. So let's look at these three and see how they work. So which form are we given here? Well, this is y equals mx plus b. This is our beginning point and our move. So our beginning point here is -7, and our move is the 4. So what's the slope? Well, it's 4. I'm going to put it over 1 so we can make a fraction out of it. The y-intercept is b. That's -7. Well, what's the x-intercept? Well, the way we would find the x-intercept is we would put 0 in for y. So like this, we'd say 0 equals 4x minus 7. We would solve that by adding 7 on this side. And then we would divide by 4. And so the x-intercept is 7 over 4. Okay? And now let's graph it. So for slope-intercept, we begin at the B, so I'm going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to count down 7. And then the slope is telling me to go up 4 and then right 1. So I'm going to count from my beginning point. I'm going to put my pencil on my beginning point. I'm going to count up 4 and right 1. I can do that numerous times, like this. And then I can sketch my line through those points. And I like this feature. It kind of makes a straight line for me. I'm going to put arrows on the ends. And I like you to graph all the way through the graph if you can. I hate when students put like this. This is their line that they graphed on a graph. And it's like, really? We can do better than that. So that's slope-intercept form. Let's see, this one has x and y on the same side of the equal sign and the constants on the other side. This is called standard form. So this is standard form. And the easy thing to figure out here are the intercepts. We're just going to put 0 in for x, then y. So if we put 0 in for x, this term right here is just going to disappear. And so we get -3y equals 9, and we just divide 9 by -3 makes negative 3. Now let's do the same thing with the y. Let's put 0 in for y. That's just going to become 0. And then I have 2x equals 9. And divide by 2, and you get 4.5 for the x-intercept. So we know those are the 2 points where it crosses the x and the y-axis. So I'm going to go to the x-axis at 4.5. And it's just halfway in between. And then the y-intercept is negative 3. And then I would just draw my line through there. Okay. Now, what's the slope? Well, the slope is the change in the y over the change in the x. So this thing goes from this y-intercept of 3, it goes up, or negative 3, it goes up 3 over 1, 2, 3, 4.5. So I could write slope is 3 over 4.5, but we can't have a decimal in the fraction like that. So why don't we just multiply both of these by 2? Then I'll make a 6 over 9. And then we see now that reduces to 1. Oh, excuse me, not 1. 3 goes into each of those. I can make this 2/3. So there's my slope, 2/3. So once it's graphed, you can kind of count the slope. It went up 3 and it went right 4.5. So up 3 over then 4.5. This is the up. This is the over, and that's the y's are the up, the x's are the overs. And then you've got to make it into a fraction that doesn't have a decimal in it. So I just doubled both and then realized that reduced. Okay, that's standard form. Get your intercepts. Example 3, well, this one is called point slope form. Point slope says y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So here's the y1, there's the m, and there's the x1. Okay, that's the form, just using the form there. Fill in the other parts here for you. So notice it says y plus 5, but my formula for the point slope is y minus y1. So what would have to be true about y1 to make that minus sign turn into a plus sign right there? And how does that thing become a plus? Well, the y1 has to be negative. So it's negative y1. So that would be a negative 5. Same thing with the x. This is x minus x1, and the formula, or the equation that we were given says x minus 2. So x minus x1 and x minus 2. So x1's just 2. So anytime we're looking at that particular form of point slope, you need to always think opposite. If it says y minus y1, you got to think the opposite of of positive 5 is negative 5. And then for x1, it's the opposite of negative 2, which is 2. So 2 and negative 5 are my xy pair there. I can't seem to get my 5 to show up well. Keep trying to make a nice 5, and it keeps, there we go. So that's a point. And then the slope is the 4. But I'm going to make it into a fraction again. So 4 over 1. So I got to find the point 2, negative 5. So you start at the point. You start at x1, y1. So right 2, down 5. And then the slope is 4. So from this point, I'm going to go up 4 and right 1. Up 4 and right 1. And I'll do the opposite. I'll go down 4 and left 1. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to get on there. So we'll try that right there. And it's really difficult to tell, where does that cross the x-axis, and where I can't even see where it crosses the y-axis. So we're going to have to do a little algebra on this. To get the x-intercept, we're going to put 0 in for y. So I'm going to put in, so for the x-intercept, 0 plus 5 equals 4 times x minus 2. So 0 plus 5 is just 5, and then to get rid of the 4, I'll divide by 4 equals x minus 2. Then I'll add 2, like this. Well, I have to make 2 into fourths, because I got to add 5 fourths, and how many fourths is 2? So in 2, if you break 2 things into 4 pieces each, that makes 8 fourths, doesn't it? So 8 fourths plus 5 fourths is 13 fourths. So that's our x-intercept, 13 fourths. Then for our y-intercept, we're going to make the x value 0. So I'm going to write y plus 5. Here's our y-intercept. Y plus 5 equals 4, and then 0 minus 2 is just negative 2. So 4 minus 2, or 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And subtract 5 more. Yeah, negative 13 for the y-intercept on that. Okay. So how did we do the point slope again? We identified x1, y1. That was our point, 2, negative 5. We always think opposite. So it looks like x minus 2, so it becomes a positive 2. And it says y plus 5, so it becomes a negative 5. And so that's my starting point, 2, negative 5. And then the slope is given to you easily. It's just the 4, so make it into a fraction, 4 over 1. And the graph begins at 2, negative 5, and then I went up 4, right 1. And then to get the x and y intercepts, I just plug 0 in for x and 0 in for y, right? And do the math. Be a good math student. So here's some tricky questions you can answer. So answer true or false regarding that equation. Well, that equation, it's in standard form. So to graph that, because that's the best way to do this problem, is to graph it, I'm going to remember that for standard form, I'm looking for the x and y intercept. So I'm going to put 0 in for y, and x minus 0 just means x is 70. So x is 70. And then for y, I'm going to put 0 in for x, and I'm going to take 70 and divide by negative 10. And I get negative 7. So this graph is going to look kind of goofy because, the x-axis, I can't get to 70 unless I count by tens. So I'm going to count by tens and call that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 70. And if I go by tens on the y-axis, negative 7 would be like right there, not quite down to 1. So my line looks something like, it doesn't even want to move into place. So there's my line, like that. So, questions then. When x is greater than 0, y is less than 0. Well, what's another way of saying x is greater than 0? Isn't that really just saying that when x is positive? And when something's less than 0, isn't it really just saying it's negative? So it's saying that every time x is positive, or for every positive x number, the y values are negative. Well, that's not true, because there's positive x values out here where the y values are going to be positive. So that's false. When x is less than 0 or negative, y is greater than 0, that's positive. Well, here's where x is less than 0, and I don't think the y values are positive there, so that's false. As the value of x increases, y decreases. Well, as x goes up, isn't y going up as well? This line is sloping upwards slightly, so that's false. The relation passes through the third quadrant. Well, remember your quadrants now. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. Well, it definitely passes through the third quadrant. The relation passes through the first quadrant. Well, yep, over here in this section, again, it's going to reach into the first quadrant and stay there. So that one's true. So best thing to do is take the equation and solve it. The best thing to do is take the equation and graph it, right? Standard form, so I use the x and y intercepts. And then analyze the questions or the statements and see if they're true or false. It makes it much easier. So looking at this equation, this really isn't standard form because the 2/3, the fractions, the coefficients have to be whole numbers. So I think what we ought to do on this one is rearrange the equation a little bit. So if we took the y minus y over to the other side, it's going to become a positive y. And then if I take the 7 from the right to the left, it's going to become a negative 7. So my equation would say y equals 2/3 x minus 7. You see that? I know I kind of switched things up. Once I moved the y and the 7, then this side and this side kind of switched places in my writing there. So, but this is a lot easier because this is now slope-intercept form. And slope-intercept form tells me the beginning point and the slope. So I'm going to begin at negative 7. There it is. And then I'm going to move up 2 and over 3. Up 2 and over 3. That's probably good enough. I'll get my line on there. There we go. So when x is greater than 0 means positive. Greater than 0 positive. So it says for every positive x, there's a positive y. Well, that's not true. For this section right here, x is positive, but y is negative. So that's false. When x is negative, y is negative. So negative, negative. Well, here's the section where x is negative, and it looks like all the y values are negative too. So that one's going to be true. As the value of x decreases, the value of y decreases. Well, if x goes left, does y go down? And the answer is yes, it does. True. The relation passes through the third quadrant. I'd say that's true. It passes through the first, yes, quadrant as well. Okay? So we're just taking what you know about graphing and then kind of analyzing the graph and answering some questions about the values of x and y. Okay? You guys try this one. Pause the video, start it back up when you're ready. So hopefully you graphed y equals negative 7, remembering that y equals a number is a horizontal line and x equals a number is a vertical line. So y equals negative 7 means it simply passes through negative 7 on the y-axis. So it's going to look just like that. So it says, what's the slope? Well, the slope here is the change in y is 0, and the change in x is, well, the change in y is any number you want. The change in x is 0, which means it's any y value over 0 is undefined. So the slope is undefined. That's not true. I told you a lie. The change in x is 1. The change in y is 0. Sorry about that. Yes, this is 0 over x, which is just 0. So the slope is 0. The y-intercept is negative 7 because it crosses at negative 7. The x-intercept is there's none. It does not touch the x-axis. So there's a couple of assignments for you. The IXL Geometry E2, graphing a linear equation. And then the form is going to ask you about graphing and then ask you some of those questions we were looking at earlier. So the second half of the lesson.